live yet, so you can say bum and stuff like that.
But I can't now.
Setting up your meeting for YouTube live. Yeah, okay, done. Redirect. Live yet, so you can say bum and stuff like that.
But I can't now.
Great, so that was it. So it is live streaming, but I've just closed the window down. Right, okay, so here we are talking about ideas in experiments in learning, really broadly. I'm interested to know, in all your experiences, Aaron, working in the language learning domain, especially doing one-to-ones with people, what have you learned over the last 15 years? And what have you taken from that learning and put into kind of some of the approaches that people can access in the app?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Big old question to start with. Nothing,
Yeah, I mean, well,
nothing
we're not going
easy
to have
to
time
begin
to
with.
do all of it, but it just so what are the things that you? I mean, people, if I'm discovering this content, I'm thinking, okay, so what? Who are these guys? Why should I pay any kind of attention to them? And so I'd usually like to start with, well, we have some evidence. The
Yeah.
evidence has been borne out of like 15 years of your experiments broadly. Um, what have you learnt? Is really where I'd start with. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. As soon as you said 15 years, I just kind of felt incredibly tired, and as if I'd probably forgotten
Yeah.
half of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. It's been a long old stretch of experimentation. So I'm
Mm.
just going to see what comes front of mind. I mean, I suppose the biggest thing I've learned is that actually the key underserved factor, I think, in language acquisition is support for the emotional journey rather than support for the neurological journey. So I
Hmm.
think the neurological journey can be achieved in quite a lot of different ways. Some of them I think are more efficient than others, but the emotional journey is what really needs to be solved. If somebody solves the emotional journey, then they will get through having a suboptimal neurological journey. But if they don't solve for the emotional journey, they will not get through having a highly optimized neurological journey. So that's probably the big thing, and that's driven a huge amount of the stuff we've done around the kind of commentary we give in apps, the sort of meta learning that we try to add to the process so that people understand that what they're doing is successful. Because it really, I mean, so much of it comes back to this, so much of the emotional journey comes back to how we identify success and how we feel successful in ourselves. And we've got a bunch of cognitive biases in there which really tend to trip us up. So we try and speak to as many of those as possible and try and help inoculate against them. The other thing which stands out is, and this was pretty, I mean, this I got a handle on earlier than the stuff about the emotional journey, but I now see it as kind of secondary importance. The the brain clearly has a neuroplastic response, not just to learning content, but to the structures around that learning content. So, in other words, you need a neuroplastic response to learn anything, and we know that. But if you learn things in very intensive ways, you get better at learning things in very intensive ways. So when you encounter our methodology for the first time, it seems like very hard work, largely because it is very hard work, but also kind of inherently playful. And as long as you can embrace the playfulness, it doesn't feel like a piece of drudgery. But it seems sensible to presume that round about half an hour of that kind of work is about tops, because after half an hour you will be feeling a little bit tired and you'll be thinking, well, if I'm getting tired, I'm learning suboptimally, so I should stop now. And we have kind of gradually and then a little bit more aggressively driven up those times to see what is possible. And it's turned out that the brain responds superbly well to doing, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, certainly for up to 10 days in a row. And the only issue there really is that you have to not fall into the trap of believing that because you're tired, you're not learning anymore. And we've got just huge amounts of evidence now that even while you're very, very tired, you are still learning. In fact, we've got one piece of evidence, one of my favorite ones, the 2 intensive days of Manx I did. So they were 16 months apart, and I was still finding it at that stage. I certainly found it really, hard to do a full day. 10 hours left me feeling absolutely exhausted. But on that first Manx day, as well as feeling absolutely exhausted, I was also suffering the aftermath of a slightly stupid challenge that I'd been with a bunch of immersion Welsh learners, and I'd said I was going to do the Manx day. And we'd been in the pub and we'd been talking about how does alcohol impact language acquisition? And I'd been saying, well, everybody knows that when your inhibition goes down, you talk more. Talking more is good for language acquisition. So this common thing of get down to the pub, have a couple of pints, and suddenly, oh, I use this language much better than I realized I did. This is a very, very known experience. Obviously, it's fraught with complexities because there are things that you don't want to be encouraging people to do in terms of consuming alcohol. But what they were really interested in was, would consuming alcohol help or hinder the process of learning with our methodology? And I said, don't really know. I kind of suspect it would hinder it. It might help it in terms of people who get very upset about making mistakes. If they've got inhibitions down a little bit, maybe they'll be a bit less upset about that. And then maybe they'll be a bit more playful. That could be a positive thing. But in general, I think it would be fairly interruptive. And they said, well, why don't you test it on your Manx day? So I mentioned this to Adrian, the friend who produced the Manx content, and he said, superb idea. I'm sending down a bottle of Manx vodka. So on that first day, I decided to run. Initially, I thought what I would do, because we still had these sort of half-hour static sessions, I thought what I will do will be to take a shot after each half hour. And by about sort of 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I was noticing the effects of that. It was a bit wobbly. And so I kind of dialed back to just sort of one every hour or two. I really slowed down. And I sort of thought, there were some periods there where I was a bit tipsy. So I probably won't have memories for those. 16 months later, I have memories for those. So even that kind of slightly unintelligent willingness to shoot myself in the foot did not lead to a significant interruption of the learning process. So we have definitely seen that the brain's capacity for learning in the right kind of context is dramatically more than we consistently presume it is. And this kind of speaks to some of the stuff you and I have talked about, how we believe that schools could be using the right approaches to memory. They could be dramatically reducing the amount of time it takes to form the memories they want children to form. So yeah, those are the two big things.
Yeah.
That it's the emotional journey, but that also the neurological journey can be dialed up to levels that we wouldn't normally expect, and that's what you and I are going to test in Japanuary with these 10 intensive days of Japanese.
Yeah, I will come to that later because that's again quite interesting, and we did a whole session on that last week. But what I'm interested is if you could say more to help people understand a little bit more about what you mean by the emotional journey, because we often, because we are perhaps domain specialists, we know precisely what we mean by this. I'm not sure everybody knows precisely what we mean by this, and it might be a little different. So can we unpack that a little bit? You're talking about the emotional journey and the emotional side of things, first of all.
Yeah, great point. So, I kind of believe that this is really central to the human experience, not just to learning. I think this is stuff that we've got massive, massive upside for schools doing more with, and people becoming better at. So the emotions, it's kind of funny how little we tend to talk about them in many of these contexts. But the emotional experience is, to a great extent, the experience of being human, and it's
Mhm.
the most challenging and often the most beautiful element of being human. I don't think any of us would sign up to have our emotions taken away. And yet, we have a bunch of patterns as a species and as individuals that are just incredibly unhelpful to
Mhm.
us. And it's amazing how widespread they are. I mean, so many people have got very low levels of belief in themselves. So many people have status anxiety, worry about the future,
Mhm.
struggle with their sense of the pain for all the bad things that are going on in the world. And none of this is unintelligent. None of this is unreasonable.
Mhm.
It's all a normal response to the systems that we find ourselves existing within, but it's also incredibly limiting and damaging for us. Spending all your time in a state of stress, spending all your time in a state of pain, that this is not how to get the best out of human beings. And human
Mhm.
beings have got such an extraordinary amount to offer. But they definitely achieve more. They offer more. They have a better time. They have more positive impact on the people around them when they feel happier rather than when they feel less happy.
Mhm.
So for me, this is the heart of the emotional journey, and I kind of think that we need a a wide ranging reboot there that. Um, if it's better to be happier than to be unhappy, then we should really be looking at how can we be consciously happy all day long. Um, how do we target that as where we're trying to get to? But of course, that sounds immediately out of reach. So I think if we can target these kinds of intense learning sessions and say, well, let's make sure that our happiness levels are higher in these kinds of learning sessions, then that's the beginning of that kind of a reboot. And I find it fascinating by now because of the work we've done around this, and I know perfectly well that people in an intensive learning environment can consistently find that an extremely happy, if not an actively joyful environment. But there's some work they have to do to get there. There are some mindset shifts around the nature of success in learning. But there are also some practices around where their focus is while they're learning, what they're paying attention to, what they're getting distracted by, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know if I've really. It's a big old topic. I don't know how successfully I've answered where you were looking for me to move in that direction.
No, I mean, I'm just trying to, I suppose I'm trying to help people understand when we talk about the emotional side of the learning journey, the emotional journey, what we really mean by that. And what you're really saying is that emotions are critical. People perform better when they're happy.
Yeah.
Let's just then take that into the context of actually doing an intensive or doing a learning experiment and the sort of emotions that come up and the emotional journey that they go through.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, two things just struck me. One is that there's another kind of missing piece of the jigsaw there, um, and it is that we take responsibility for learning outcomes. And
Hmm.
I think we have a problem, systemically speaking, that we have far too much education where the educators don't take responsibility for the learning outcomes. They take responsibility for providing the information,
Yeah.
and then the learner is meant to drive the learner outcomes. And the challenge that we enjoy taking on is to take responsibility for the full journey. So we look at these emotional complexities, and instead of saying, there we are, that's a thing, we say,
Mm.
okay, so how do we help with this? How do
Mm.
we create the right kind of environment? Um, And then it just struck me, because I was talking very kind of conceptual in a very abstract way there. Concrete examples would definitely be a helpful thing. So one of the most common experiences is possibly universal in people learning with our methodology. At some point, they will hear a prompt in a language that they know. They will say something in the language that they're acquiring, and they will then hear a model that is different to what they said. Um, I think it's probably fair to say that will be a universal experience. And then, and then they have an emotional response to that.
Right.
And in the vast majority of cases, at least in people's first experience, the emotional response is very strongly negative. It's, I made a mistake. I'm bad. I'm messed up. I'm not doing very well at this. I'm unsuccessful. All the psychological junk that people have got churning around inside their thought patterns can come very quickly to the surface in just a moment of something that the brain perceives as a mistake and therefore as a bad thing, a threatening thing. So this, I mean, actually, we could just we could talk for the rest of the hour just about mistakes. And I love that thing that you brought a few weeks ago now. How about if we wrote them with the MIS in lowercase and the takes in uppercase? These are takes. This is like, it's like getting a piece of drama right. It's like getting a piece of writing right. You have to go through things. You have to cycle. You have to revisit. You have to keep on doing. Nobody ever gets something challenging perfectly right the first time they do it. It doesn't happen. So we have takes, and if we start seeing the takes in the mistakes, the less we think about the miss, the more we think about the takes, the easier it gets to think, oh, this is the learning. So yes, I don't know if you feel like drilling down there, or if we're staying reasonably wide around the emotional journey, but this mistakes is the central example of when the emotional journey gets difficult, because it's when people start telling themselves that because they've made a lot of mistakes, they're not doing very well, that they then can lose faith in their own progress. And once somebody loses faith in their own progress, then they're very unlikely to achieve success. It doesn't matter if what they're doing is really neurologically consistent and robust and will trigger the right results. If they don't believe that, they won't complete that journey. And this, of course, is the broad spectrum situation, largely in schools. We don't have a very high percentage of people attending schools who are convinced that they are achieving success in their learning. In fact, most people feel kind of frustrated and struggling, and as if it's a hard thing to do, because that's their experience of it. So there's the heart of it. There's an example, a concrete example of the emotional journey. That's the heart of it. And actually, you probably could say that if you solve for people's perception of mistakes, if they turn them into takes and let go of the miss, then that's probably a significant percentage of the emotional journey solved right there.
I think, yes, I was going to say it's important to, the more specific we are about things, the easier it is for people to abstract and generalize. So I think we should drill down on mistakes. I mean, people don't know this yet, but I love in the app and the things that you've learned from your one-on-one sessions to do with talking to people about the nature of the mistakes and the different types of things and when they notice it's a mistake. So I think it's definitely worth, I agree with you. It's, if we solve for the concept of mistakes becoming takes, that's a massive part of how people will feel as they go through their learning experience. So I think it's worth drilling down on. Let's talk some more. So say more about mistakes in general and your experience of what that can do to people and how they can then sort of let their emotions get in the way.
So the standard mistake when people are learning with the say something in method is what I described earlier: prompt, statement, different model. It's worth unpacking that. I mean, it seems so natural to say, well, there we are, that's a bad thing. You told me to say, I want to learn Welsh, and I said, dwi eisiau siarad Cymraeg. And then you heard dwi eisiau dysgu Cymraeg, and you realized that instead of dysgu, you'd said siarad, and you think, oh, I'm wrong, I got it wrong, I'm bad. But it's unpacking what's actually happening there, neurologically speaking, I think is fascinating, and maybe, you know, one of the keys to it. So one of the biggest limiters for any kind of learning is the working memory. And people have different kind of capacity in their working memory, but it's not wildly different. You know, it's not really a human experience to be able to hold much more than about 7 or 8 items in your working memory, even if you train very hard for it. I mean, actually, most of the sort of memory training that people do is about chunking things so that you're processing them as single items rather than increasing your capacity for how many items you can hold in working memory. So when we give you a prompt in English, you have to remember that prompt and then produce it in the target language. And then you hear the model in the target language, and you have to hold that in your working memory while you're still holding the memory of what you said in your working memory. So this is already really kind of testing the limits there of the working memory. And then on top of that, you have to compare those two things to each other to notice a difference. And when you notice a difference, it's just, I mean, to me, it seems crazy. You notice a difference and you go, oh, I made a mistake. But it's the act of noticing a difference, which is the moment of learning. So every single time you're getting distracted by thinking, oh, I did something bad, you've got evidence right in front of you that your brain is in the middle of doing something good. And if you can just notice that, my brain identified a difference. This is what learning is. I remember you saying a while back that, you know, perhaps we can sort of identify almost all learning as being the matter of noticing differences. When you notice the difference between two things, you've learned more about both of them. So I think this is kind of fundamental. I find it in one-on-one work. I find it very, very interesting that even with highly educated people, that this doesn't seem to be a common pattern of thought. That the idea that noticing differences and recognizing that as learning instead of calling it a mistake, it seems to. It's very interesting, actually. It sometimes has a kind of light switch moment for people. Sometimes people just get it. They go, oh, right, okay. And every single time it had been happening, I had been feeling bad. From now on, every single time it happens, I'm going to feel good. I'm going to give my brain a pat on the back. Other people struggle to let go of the sense that they're doing something wrong. And that's one of the things I would like actually to spend more time with. I think it would be fascinating to try and do sort of larger population analysis of what kind of differences there might be between those people. My sense is not that it is an educational achievement difference. My sense is that there's something about the strength of the core patterns around self-blame and self-worth. So,
Okay.
yeah, I've kind of gone a little bit off target there.
So let's bring it back to this idea of making mistakes. And I mean, I think the thing that I encountered or came across or postulated, if you like, that really all learning is how is this the same and how is this different? And it could be the new thing compared with something that you already know. It could be two new things compared with each other. It could be something that you're doing as an attempt to match up with something that is a model, for example, in the SSI method. But I think that what I know that you talk about, and I think we should say a bit more about it, is this: there is an awful lot of importance attached to the fact that you can even notice that it's a mistake,
Yeah, you know,
that it is a difference. Yeah, so I think we should say more about that.
it's a huge achievement. not sure how much more I've got to say about that, but it really, it's the working memory limit that you're knocking up against there. Um, no, oh no, actually, so noticing is really interesting. So achieving that moment of noticing is fairly neurologically complex. So it's a sign that your brain is working hard, and it's a sign that your brain is achieving stuff. But one of the interesting things about noticing is that we can train for noticing. So we can become better at deciding where we are going to direct our attention.
Hmm.
So in a sense, this is a little sort of taster example of the value of noticing, um, and the way in which noticing can go wrong, the way in which we can get stuck in noticing the wrong things and paying attention to the wrong things. So it's like a little kind of nudge. It's, oh, here is a little painful moment, which when you unpack it, when you understand what's happening neurologically speaking, you can realize is a successful moment.
Hmm.
So maybe there's a hint in there that you want to be improving your capacity to direct your attention where you want it to be. And I think we lead lives where, I mean, we are exposed to more information than any human beings have ever been exposed to. And it's a very fracturing kind of experience. I think we see this a lot on social media. Many people are in sort of continual states of distraction. And we see some of the things that, paying attention to screens can do to children's development.
Hmm.
So this idea that we don't just have to accept that the act of noticing is a trainable trait, I
Hmm.
think is very powerful. I think it goes. I was going to say it goes beyond learning, but I'm not sure if anything goes beyond
Goes
learning. In
beyond
this
learning.
sense,
Yeah.
it's all learning, isn't it? Because there was another thing that came to my mind when you were saying that, which is, this whole idea of mistakes is it's sort of fundamentally flawed. And I was just thinking about mycelial networks, and so mycelial network. Um, and this is the sort of the real thing underneath the mushrooms. So mushrooms are kind of like the fruit.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
mycelial network is the important thing, and largely it's underground. And mycelial networks, they keep on moving, they keep on testing, they keep on going in different directions. And then when they find a source of food, a source of energy, then they will go more in that direction.
Yeah.
And it seems to me very clear that it would be, if you imagine a mycelial network, just imagine it sort of as a neat and tidy circle, just for simplicity's sake,
Hmm.
and you imagine it testing in sort of 100 different directions and then finding food in one of them. How on earth could you possibly think that the 99 other ones were mistakes, were bad things? That's the activity which reaches the point of success. And I think this is something that, we don't really have this as a central pattern. The understanding that, in a sense, everything we do in life is a little mini experiment. It's what we're
Hmm.
doing all the time. We're trying things, and then we see what happens, and then we usually adapt to what happens. Sometimes we get stuck in patterns where we don't adapt. So I would say that not adapting, not making effort, not trying new things, that's where you can find signs of a lack of success. That's where you can find getting stuck. That's where you can find, entropy increasing in a local area.
Hmm.
But everything that involves movement, everything that involves attempts and effort and
Hmm.
tests, all of this is by definition good. All of it is by definition really learning. So yeah, going very wide again there, but I just came
No,
to
I
mind
mean,
of my
this is
senior networks.
this is sort of what I was thinking about. And you talk a lot about this. I mean, I've been doing a fair bit of Chinese recently, so I hear all the things, all the emotional support and the psychological awareness of the learning that you're sort of popping in there. And one of the things I want you to talk more about is the distance between what you are actually producing and what you think is the answer or the correct thing and the actual correct thing. And I think the capacity to sort of notice it's not just this is wrong, I did something wrong and I can feel bad or I can feel good or whatever. But it's like when you think you know, and the reason you think you know is because you're quite close to it or something like that. There's something important about sort of the closeness of the mistake, isn't there? And the kind of the surprise, how much you thought it was this when it is really this, and all that sort of stuff. I think there's a lot to say about that.
Yeah, this is one of the interesting things I think about memory formation. So people often have a very binary perception of memory. Either you remember something or you don't remember it. And this is kind of supported by a lot of the patterns we see at school. So if you do a test in school and you get 12 out of 20, then the feedback you get basically is, well, you got 12 of them right, so well done, but you got 8 of them wrong, so you need to go and revise those 8 because you haven't learned them. And pretty much both of those statements are fundamentally wrong. The 12 that you got, you might not get again tomorrow. You don't know that you've built a successful long-term memory there. And the 8 that you got wrong, again tomorrow, without doing anything different, you might just get them right because we're just not very good at assessing where a memory is. The capacity to notice the formation of memories is very, very limited. So what we're always saying to people is it helps to understand that memory, instead of being binary, memory is a layered experience. So every single time we encounter something, we will encode more information about it. And then when we don't encounter things, we're likely to start letting go of some of those layers of encoding. Some things, I mean, oh, it's just such a big topic. I want to go in about 14 different directions at once. I'm gonna resist. So if we think about memory as layered acquisition of information, then every single time we revisit an item, we encode more information about it. So if you imagine, I'm always sort of thinking about this as the sea. So we've got the seabed here and the surface of the sea here. This is where we want to be. So every single time we meet something, we encode a little bit more information until eventually it surfaces and it bobs up and down for a while, which can be very frustrating. And then eventually it locks in above here. This is now active memory. We can acquire it whenever we want to and use it whenever we want to, if we're thinking of a particular word, for example. But the problem here is that the whole way up this journey of encoding, the brain can't see the difference. The brain only sees, I produced this word or I didn't produce this word. So the brain sees the results in this very binary way, which we've been told often is how memory works. You've learned it or you haven't. So it's very hard for us to pay attention to the process that's happening there. There's a process happening there. There's, it's incontrovertible. The encoding of extra information is a thing. It just happens. So one of the things that would be very helpful would be if we could sense where we are on that journey, which we don't consciously feel we can do, but there is one way. And I find this joyful in a sense, because this one way of noticing where you are on the journey is something which always gets initially misinterpreted by the learner. So when you are first encountering an item of information, when you haven't encountered it, if I ask you to tell me a word in a language that you don't know, you just
Say
say, well,
Japanese, for example.
yeah,
If you ask me to say, I have no idea. Yeah.
what's the Japanese for humidity? You go, I don't know. Why?
Really don't know.
Don't necessarily feel the loss of it either,
Yeah.
quite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, But if you can say to somebody, and this is what we see in the learning process itself with the methodology, if you can say to somebody, what's the Welsh or the Japanese for this word, then it's a word that they've almost acquired. Oh, there we are.
Oh, I lost you then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Say
that
again.
went in and out. Okay,
So
so
it's a word they've almost acquired. Yeah.
yes, if we say to somebody, what is this word? and they've almost quite, maybe they've even surfaced it a couple of times, but it's not quite there, and they can't quite remember it. Oh my word, does that get frustrating?
Mm.
And
Mm.
when you're watching somebody go through that experience, you see their face kind of crunches up. They go, oh, oh, and it's exactly like a visual of somebody experiencing pain. It's
Mm.
clearly it's a form of pain.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
then when you say the word to them, they go, oh, oh, almost as if they want to sort of kick or punch. It's very similar to, you know, somebody who's just been scratched by a cat or stabbed by a needle. It's this moment of expressing pain, um, and and people kind of hate it. Understandably, pain's not the loveliest thing in the world. If people have enough of that pain, they will often start telling themselves that their learning is unsuccessful. But they're only really getting that level of pain when they're very, very close to having formed the memory. So
Yeah.
they've done maybe 90% of the work by then. So actually, the moment of pain, the moment of frustration is the one really reliable sign that your brain is very close to forming a successful long-term
Yeah.
memory there. So it should be celebratory. Whenever
Yes.
we have that sense of frustration, we should be thinking, ah, brilliant. I'm into the frustration. I've done most of the work for this. It's almost finished. But we don't think it's almost finished. We think, I still don't know this. I
Mm.
should know it by now. And as soon
Mm.
as people start using that word should, which is, I think, a fascinating word, you know, I should know it by now is such a common thing we hear from our learners.
Mm.
And I always think, who are you comparing it to? Is there some kind of, you know, universally accepted process of language acquisition that you should have learned all these things by day 2, these ones by day 4? It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. So what happens is people compare themselves to some kind of imaginary perfect learner. They think,
Stakhanovite.
yeah, they think, oh, that kid who was top of the class at school would have
Yeah.
learnt it by now,
Yeah.
damn
Yeah.
their
Mm.
eyes. But and
Mm.
it's such a pointless activity. You know, the only thing it's worth noticing is either I have acquired it by now or I'm still acquiring it. And if you're still acquiring it, if you can just witness that and then remember, oh, I felt some pain there, I felt some frustration, that means I've acquired a significant amount of memory for that item, then you know you're just winning all the time.
That's great, isn't it? So actually, if you're talking about the process of getting more information, you're actually getting more information about things than even when you surface it completely. Because when you surface it completely, you're less aware of it. You're just saying it. But when you're very, very close to it and you feel that pain, that's much more valuable because you can train the noticing mind to say, ah, it's an opportunity for you to kind of go meta and start reminding yourself about the power of the learning process. And yeah, okay,
Yeah,
I get that.
and it's really quite clear, and there's some good work on this. A guy called Dr. Robert Bjork, University of California.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of work on what he calls desirable difficulties,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's clear that easiness does not correlate very well with memory acquisition.
Mm.
So if a learner of a language wants sort of a sense of emotional satisfaction, you know, one of the quickest ways you can get to a sense of, oh, look at me, is just by doing multiple repetitions of something. So you take a difficult word and you just keep on saying it. And that can feel like, oh, well, here I am, I'm saying it over and over and over. This must be me getting better. But
Mm.
it's very, very, very clear that actually multiple repetition beyond the point at which it's a struggle has no effective value for memory formation.
Mm.
So
Mm.
you can
Mm.
sort of repeat it 100 times. Maybe the first 2 or 3 have value. The rest, you're just wasting time. It's not
Yeah.
going to improve
The-
your recall later on. But
yeah.
if you do it a couple of times, then you leave it until it gets hard again. And then you do it a couple of times and then you leave it until it
Mm.
gets hard again. If you leave things until they get difficult again, the overall journey and the number of reps to have a long-term memory is dramatically, dramatically reduced.
Yes.
But that, and this goes back to the whole thing about the emotional journey. The the more space you can leave between reps, the fewer reps it will take until you have a reliable and usable memory. but also the more difficult it will feel, the more often you will make mistakes. And if you tell yourself that the mistakes are negative, the more likely you will be to start to feel as if you're failing and to start to play with the idea of giving up. So it's a really interesting dial there. The optimal approach is to do as few reps as possible and to spread them out so they're always really, really difficult. But
Yeah,
that
so
is
it's the most
challenging.
painful, isn't it? It's definitely the most
Yeah.
painful. But how much of it is painful because it's hard work for the brain? Because I know what it's like recently, just doing a number of hours on the Chinese. It is hard work. You know, you do a couple of hours of that and you're quite exhausted.
Yeah.
But how much of it is hard in terms of neurologically, because you're doing a search every time you're asked to present something, and you're scouring the brain, do a rapid search about all the things that could possibly be close to all the possible things that you might know. And when you say something, you're synthesizing from these pieces and turning it into something. So it's hard work. But how much of it is really hard because of the psychological and the disappointment and the feeling when you're not getting it right? What's your, I mean, this is meaningless really to sort of compare and put numbers on it, but the sense of the difficulty, how much of it could we ameliorate by just saying, oh, this is brilliant, this is really valuable, you'll love this anytime you notice this is amazing. Would that make it less hard?
It's the great balance
Yeah.
again. So neurologically speaking, I mean, the brain is a massive, massive user of energy.
Mm.
So when you consider it, you know, its percentage of the body weight and the amount of
Mm.
energy it uses,
Mhm, mhm.
it's the thing that requires energy. It's really what we're doing. We're sort of these organisms that go and hunt energy in order for the brain to do its stuff.
There's a great Ken Robinson line where he says, you know, he's talking about the importance of the body, and he says, you know, the body isn't just a transport device for the head. Well, kind of is. Even evolutionarily, sort of is
Yeah,
really.
it's really, it's just our own little mycelial network to get
Yeah,
energy for
yeah,
this thing, this
to
fascinating
do
thing.
stuff. Yeah.
So, so yes, and when you know, I think there's one of the things I find fascinating about intensive learning is, I think broadly speaking, we the brain is extremely good at efficiency. It
Mm.
really, really I mean, if you compare the efficiency of the brain to the efficiency of the most stunning supercomputers, you know, the brain beats them hands
Yeah.
down. The amount of energy it takes to do the kinds of calculations it's capable of doing. I mean, it's the most complex and stunning thing in the known universe. So a
Yeah.
lot.
Right now, we're discovering that with AI. AI can do all these really good things as well as a human, but like human does it on 20 watts. And the AI is using as much energy as a small country. So you're sort of going, oh, okay. Yeah.
Crazy,
Yeah.
crazy differentiate. I mean, we should all just feel so proud of our brains and what they're
Mm.
capable of doing.
Mm.
Most of the time, our brains are doing everything they can to be running on lowest possible energy.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
don't tend to push our brains as hard as they can be pushed. In fact, we almost never push our
Mhm.
brains as hard as they can be pushed. And
Mhm.
this is the human experience. That's okay because it's brilliant at optimizing. We actually don't want to be flat out all the time.
Mhm.
So when we go flat out all the time, um, we get strangely tired. We're not very used to that sense of
Mhm.
tiredness. It's an unfamiliar tiredness. We're very, very used to familiar to physical
Physical
tiredness.
touch.
That's something we understand, we have experience of, all very familiar. Mental tiredness, brain tiredness, we don't often get put in that place.
No, we
Um,
don't like it, do we? Really, if we're
we kind of
honest.
shy away from it. The
Yeah.
brain goes, no,
Yeah.
this I'm trying to optimize here. Leave
I'm
me
trying to
alone.
save it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so for me, I think that I mean, you know, language is such a fascinating element of humanity and the brain and the interweaving of how language drives brain development, drives language. You know, it's clear that language is a very, very significant part of why we have such a big and such a complex brain.
Mhm.
Um, Now, language we can use all day long. The cost to us of using a known language, again, stunning optimization. It's very, very, very easy.
Mhm.
Um, but the cost of using a non-known language, that's dramatically different. I suspect that's one of the highest costs the brain can pay. I
Mm.
suspect that this process, this game we have of prompt in a known language, say it in a target language, is one of the most difficult things we can do, actually. Um, I would imagine that there's probably sort of complex mathematical thought which matches it, but I have no experience of that myself.
Mm.
In terms of taking most people's brains and putting them into massively high levels of pressure, I think this little word game is about as not far off a gold standard. It's so difficult, and yet we can adapt to doing it all day long. We can do this word game all day long. People
Mm.
can do this word game all day long.
Mm.
Um, but then when they do, they will have these experiences that you were talking about earlier of exhaustion. It will feel very, very, very tired. And they will start to doubt themselves in a lot of different ways. We know, neurologically speaking, that none of that matters. They keep on doing the game, they will keep on getting the results. However exhausted they are, while they're still actually awake, it's going to be working. However, that's then where you get this overlap with the emotional journey. Now, the emotional journey, I think this is interesting. It's difficult in a very different way. The emotional journey isn't to do with sort of energy input and output. It's not to do with how efficient the brain is. The emotional energy is all to do with the stories we've got running largely on autopilot
Mm.
inside our own
Mm.
heads.
Mhm.
And when the stories that we have running inside our heads are supportive of us,
Mhm.
then we can achieve great things. If we have a story running in our heads, it's going to be fascinating for us to kind of witness this in Japanuary. When our stories are saying, of course we can do this, we know we can do this, and it's very exciting, it's very interesting because we haven't done it before,
Mm.
then we'll be flying. When our stories tip over into, oh gosh, it's going to be embarrassing when other people see I haven't done this as well as I thought I would do it, and
Yeah,
maybe
this is
I'm
harder
not.
than this is harder than you thought.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not going to. Maybe we shouldn't do 10 intensive days in a row. Maybe we should have a break somewhere. When the
Mm.
stories get full of doubt and negativity, we'll have some tougher patches. So it's interesting for me that shift. You don't shift from a negative story to a positive story by trying harder. You shift from a negative story to a positive story by having moments of insight and then practicing, I think, remembering those moments of insight.
Mm. Mm.
So you and I spend a lot of time doing this. January is going to be fascinating because we will almost certainly at some point have the negative stories kick in, and noticing how quickly we're able to reframe and
Mhm.
get back to the positive stories is going to be a really, really interesting piece of information. But certainly, given that most people do not spend a lot of time practicing moving from negative to positive stories,
Mm.
for most people, that is a more difficult piece of work. So
Yes.
it doesn't require extra levels of effort, but there's something in there it does require. And this is kind of still, an area of inquiry for us. We start to get into a lot of overlap with various different lines of wisdom traditions like Buddhism,
Mm.
also a lot of the sort of conceptual frameworking stuff that you're very interested in. But I don't feel we have this is the answer sitting there ready to be done. I think we kind of have a neurological answer to language acquisition, but I don't think we have a straightforward black and white answer to the emotional journey, which is kind
Right.
of why I find it more interesting at this point.
Yes. Okay. Because we could talk all day, and we would love it. I want to just see if we can limit this discussion to kind of the emotional journey and this notion of mistakes. Um, I want to pull back, circle back, if you like, to one of the things you said earlier, that we take responsibility for the outputs. Because I think what I'm hearing from that is that it's a bit like going to a doctor, and the doctors we've got some ailment, We go to the doctor's the professional, comes along and says, okay, this is what you should do. You should take these 3 pills every day for 10 days and it'll fix it, right? What we're doing then is we're no longer thinking about the outcomes at all. We're assuming we've got this trust, this teacherly authority from the doctor, and the doctor's saying, do this, and the output is guaranteed. All you need to do is take this medicine. And we don't no longer have to worry about it, think about it, is the doctor right, anything like that. We just trust. And I think that's possibly why what you're talking about, guaranteeing outputs, is so important for the psychological journey, the emotional journey, because I think then it stops the I wonder if this is going to work type thing. It's almost like you're trusting. If people use our system and if they do a one-to-one with you, you're right there, you're the educational doctor, they're trusting you, you're just saying, yeah, just keep going, this is the process, trust the process, just keep going. How much of that is kind of one of the big keys as to why the method works so well for the emotional side of things?
Well, I think there's one particular issue in there, because I think trust is fascinating.
Yeah.
And when we say to somebody, we don't know, trust me, it's pretty much neurologically impossible. People
Mm,
can't do that.
mm.
Trust has to be acquired over time. So you get these kind of structural things, like, for example, a person in a white coat, and we've got
Yes.
some pre-built, structurally, systemically encouraged trust going on there. But when you meet somebody for the first time as an individual, saying "trust me," I mean, it tends actually to sort of set some of our
Opposite.
alarm bells off. Why is he
Yeah.
asking me to trust him? He must be untrustworthy.
Yeah.
And I think, and what I always find myself doing in one-on-ones, I don't think we can make an ask that big. What we can do is say, try trusting me for the next few minutes,
Mm.
and then see what your experience of those few minutes is like.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if somebody spends 20, 30 minutes using the methodology, then they will acquire the capacity to say some things in that language.
Mm.
And then you can see a kind of spiral kicks in. Once people realize, oh, I'm beginning to achieve something here, which is not what I expected to achieve, then you get the gear change. You immediately get a significant boost of trust for the next few steps.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of, becomes this dance. So what we always have to be saying is, if your experience to date makes it feel possible for you, then trust me for the next few steps in this
Mm.
dance. And then you do another few steps, and that creates more good results. And you keep on dancing until you have significant long-term trust. Um,
Mm.
so I think that the in a sense, the building of trust is almost the same thing as the process of education. They walk hand in hand. And there was another point which I really wanted to touch on there, and it's just escaped me as I've been thinking about trust.
It'll come back if it's good enough.
Yeah,
The other thing that is coming to mind as you're talking about that is a bit like you go to the doctor. I mean, I'm trying to make it easy for people to see because we can talk about these kind of like wishy-washy things, and they're all really valuable. But people, it's a concrete example. So you go to the doctor gives you some medicine, and you start taking it, and you feel better, and so you carry on taking it, that sort of thing. If you get, so it's the trust is built in short increments. You do something, oh, that worked, oh. And I noticed that in the methodology. I mean, I think there's a number of things that are quite interesting to jump in subsequent conversations. Definitely is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I studied physics at university and I did quantum mechanics, and that's hard. But this, in terms of the rate at which you are really working your brain, in terms of the neurological function, sort of being exposed to complete sound waves that are just completely foreign to you, and then trying to make sense of them and working is incredibly hard. But I think thing that I noticed about the method very quickly is these things that I found impossible 20 minutes ago are now coming out automatically. Hmm.
It's
So
so exciting, isn't it?
this new thing that I'm finding
Yeah,
really impossible will probably yield to the same pattern. So it's the challenge with it, I think, for me and for everybody really, is that you're always at the edge of what's really bloody hard.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
always really hard.
Yes,
And
yes.
what happens is you almost don't notice that you can do these things 20 minutes ago because you're always dealing with, oh, really? Oh, what's something else? Oh, crikey,
Yes.
Moses. So that's really
Yes.
an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
I mean, we've got some definite kind of survivor bias in there. You notice the stripy orange tail in the bushes much more than the kind of crops growing safely over here. So you
Mm,
say a
mm.
sentence successfully and it maps a model, and you basically don't notice that. You go, yeah, okay, but I'm still really
Great.
worried
I'm
about
great.
this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just kind of remember the thing that had come into my mind that the trust took away,
Mm,
and it's this combination. There are two things which I just find breathtakingly beautiful to be involved with. One is when I watch somebody reach the point of understanding that their brain is capable of learning new items, that
mm,
they are not limited in the ways in which society previously might have told them they are, that they've got about 100 billion neurons, more or less. They've got a neuroplastic environment where synapses will grow and change and alter moment by moment, that they are capable of doing this, that they have the universe's most amazing supercomputer between their ears. I find it very exciting when people start to realize that they're capable of achieving things. The other one that really, really moves me always, very, very exciting, when I see people understanding that emotional regulation is also something they can change.
mm,
So when people really get this combination that the brain can acquire information and that they can become more skilled at their own emotional regulation, when you set that free, when you get those two fundamental concepts really
mm,
front and center, achieving this business of noticing from a human being, when a human being deeply understands and accepts, feels positive, and notices that their brain can acquire information and they can improve their emotional regulation, then they become enormously contributive. You know that a person who has those two key pillars, that they will lead a life which generates a huge amount of value for the people they love, for their friends, for the people around them, and more widely than that.
mm,
And when we look at the things which aren't going well, I think you can trace almost all of them back either to an inability to improve emotional regulation or a lack of understanding about how to acquire information.
mm, mm, mm.
So for me, all of these things, the dance we keep on doing around all these granular details, all of it is operating inside those two holders. Can we
Yeah.
get people to see that their brains are capable of acquiring new information? Can we get people to see that they can become more skilled at emotional regulation? Because when we can do those two things, then we can just sit back and watch them achieve startling successes.
Mm. That's very exciting. I mean, I think that's a natural conclusion to this session. In wrapping it up, what I'm hearing you saying is that we think we seem to have stumbled upon some ways that leverage the ability for people to learn new things in it, perhaps things that they didn't think they were able to learn, and to learn those much faster than they thought previously possible. And also they've developed the ability to notice their emotional state and to monitor that and perhaps even sort of alter it. So they're developing some agency in relation to their emotions. And all of these things, it's impossible to sort of separate them out completely. They're all kind of very wrapped up into the whole experience. But that could be why it seems like so far we've had some very encouraging results. Say you over the last 15 years with people who've ultimately gone from not being able to speak a language to being able to be comfortable interacting in this language. And there's lots of things that we'll dive deep on and lots of specifics. But you would say that seems to be the thing that is making them. Our awareness of that is the thing that sort of is kind of interesting. We seem to have worked out a way to like give them the right inputs so that the brain will do the stuff that it does naturally, and we seem to have given them the capacity to start regulating their emotions. Yeah, is
I
that?
find it
Yeah,
very, very encouraging how many of our learners, when they achieve conversational proficiency in a language, come and tell us that they've had this kind of shift. That they've gone from, oh, I wonder if I could, to, oh, now I know I can learn languages. I might learn some other ones as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that speaks to our sort of long-term plan, which is to get them to believe in themselves more and not just learn other languages, but maybe, as you said, you hinted at the words, to become more contributive, because a lot of people are probably not doing things that they could do because they don't have the self-belief, or they don't have perhaps the confidence. They've got perhaps no evidence for that self-belief, or very limited evidence because of their experiences in a typical education setting.
Yeah.
Okay, Aaron, thank you very much for your time this morning. It was a good one today. I really enjoyed that.
Tom, it's been fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
I find it fascinating how sort of, well, endless it all feels.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that came up that I wanted to dig
Yeah.
deep into, but we've got plenty of time. We'll do that in the next session. Okay, so that's the end of today's session. Anything else to say? No?
No, I think that was it.
Brilliant. Fantastic.